The sun was going down over the water, and I remember thinking I'd never seen anything quite like it. The sky had gone this deep shade of orange, the kind that bleeds into pink at the edges, and the ocean below was doing that thing where it catches the light and holds it. I was sitting on the little balcony of my hotel room in Maui, barefoot, a cup of tea going cold in my hand, and for the first time in maybe 15 years, I felt something close to peaceful. I want you to remember that moment, because what happened right after, it still doesn't feel entirely real to me. My phone rang. Melissa. I smiled when I saw her name, because I'd been feeling a little guilty about not calling her sooner. I'd been gone 8 days and hadn't checked in the way I always do. I pressed answer and said, "Hi, sweetheart. You should see this sunset." She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said, "Mom, I need you to listen to me." Something in her voice, not quite cold, more like carefully controlled, made me sit up straighter. "I've taken care of things," she said. "You don't need to worry about coming back to the house. Everything's been handled." I laughed a little because I thought she was being dramatic. "Melissa, I land on Thursday. What are you talking about?" "I mean, the house is listed, Mom, and I found a very nice place for you, a community really. They have a garden and everything. I think once you see it, you'll be relieved." There was a long moment where the only sound was the ocean. I said, "What?" She kept talking. She said things about how she'd been worried, how the house was too much for me, how this was the right time, how she had spoken with someone named Dr. Fenwick, who agreed. She said everything in that smooth, reassuring tone she uses with clients when she's trying to close a sale. I'm not sure how long she talked. At some point, I put the phone down on the railing and just stared at that sunset, the one I'd thought was so beautiful, and I watched it go dark. Before I tell you the rest of it, I need to take you back a little, because what happened didn't start in Hawaii. It started a long time before that, in ways I kept telling myself didn't mean what I thought they meant. My name is Evelyn. I was a second-grade teacher for 31 years in a little town outside Nashville, Tennessee. My husband Gerald and I raised 2 children in a house he built with his own hands on 3 acres of land that had been in his family since before either of us were born. Gerald died 11 years ago, a Tuesday in March, and I have never quite gotten used to the quiet he left behind. My daughter, Melissa, is 44 now. She sells luxury homes in a suburb north of the city. Does very well. She has a husband named Craig, 2 children, a lifestyle that involves a lot of things I don't entirely understand, like juice cleanses and meditation retreats. She and I have always been close, or I thought we were, the kind of close where you talk every few days, where she calls me when she's in the car, where I drive to her house on Sundays sometimes, and we drink coffee on her porch and talk about nothing in particular. My son Patrick lives in Oregon with his partner. We are close in a quieter way. He calls every Sunday without fail, but he's not the type to drop in, and I've never held that against him. I want to be fair to Melissa, because I think the fairest thing I can do is tell you who she really is, not just what she did. She grew up watching me sacrifice. That's the honest truth. Gerald and I didn't have a lot of extra money when the kids were small. There were years I wore the same 3 pairs of shoes, rotating them through the week so nobody would notice. I packed the children's lunches first and ate whatever was left. When Patrick got into his college of choice and we were short on tuition, I went back to working summers. When Melissa had her first baby and her marriage was shaky, I drove 40 minutes each way to help with the baby 3 days a week for almost a year. She grew up watching me give everything and ask for nothing. I think somewhere along the way, she absorbed something from that she probably shouldn't have. She started to expect the giving, not because she's a bad person, but because I never taught her that I had limits too. After Gerald died, she and Craig ran into some money trouble. She mentioned it once, carefully, and I offered to help. I gave her $40,000 from the savings Gerald and I had spent decades building. She thanked me, she hugged me. She said she didn't know what she'd do without me. I told her it was fine. I meant it. What I didn't know then, what I only found out much later, was that the trouble didn't go away. It shifted. The business grew on the surface, but the debt underneath grew faster. There were signs. I should tell you about the signs, because when I look back now, I can see them clearly, the way you can see ice on the road after you've already skidded. About 8 months before Hawaii, Melissa started asking me questions about the property. Casual questions, the kind you could pass off as concern. "Mom, have you thought about what you'd want to do with the land eventually?" And, "A house that size, it must be a lot to keep up by yourself." And once, very carefully, "Have you ever looked into what the market is like out there? Prices have gone up a lot." I told her I was fine. I told her I liked the house. I told her that the land was part of Gerald, and I wasn't in any hurry to let it go. She nodded and smiled and changed the subject. Then, about 5 months before Hawaii, she started talking about my health. I had a small episode in February, just dizziness, turned out to be my blood pressure, medication needing adjustment. She drove me to the doctor and sat with me in the waiting room for 2 hours, and I was grateful. But afterward, something changed. She started framing things differently. "Mom, you need to think about what happens if something serious happens and I'm not nearby." She started saying things like, "At your age," in a way I'd never heard from her before. She was 44 years old, and suddenly I was ancient. She's the one who suggested the vacation. That part I need to tell you clearly, because people might wonder. She brought it up in April, said I deserved a real trip, said she'd help me plan it, said I should go somewhere beautiful and just rest. I told her I hadn't taken a real vacation since Gerald. She said that was exactly her point. She helped me book the flights. She helped me pick the hotel. She was enthusiastic and attentive in a way that I took as love, because I wanted to take it as love. Maybe that was my mistake. She drove me to the airport herself, hugged me for a long time at the curb, said, "You deserve this, Mom." I cried a little in the car on the way to security. I'm telling you that, not because it's dramatic, but because it's true, and because I want you to understand how completely I believed it in her. Now here's the thing about Gerald. My Gerald was a quiet man, but a thorough one. He thought things through in ways I sometimes didn't, in practical, careful ways. When he was diagnosed with heart disease 6 years before he died, he sat down at the kitchen table one night with a yellow legal pad and said, "Evie, we need to be smart about things." He'd been talking to his younger sister Dorothy about it. Dorothy, who is 7 years younger than me, who never married, who spent 30 years as a paralegal in a firm downtown. Dorothy, who the rest of the family has always politely underestimated because she's quiet and plainly dressed and doesn't talk much at parties. Gerald set up an irrevocable trust. He explained it to me carefully. The house, the land, our savings and investments, all of it went into the trust. I was a beneficiary. I had full rights to live in the house and use the funds as long as I lived. But the trustee, the person with legal authority to manage and protect those assets, was Dorothy. He chose Dorothy because he loved me and knew my weakness. He knew I would give things away. He knew that if Melissa or Patrick came to me with a serious enough need, I would hand over whatever they asked for. He wanted someone in place who would protect what we'd built, not out of cruelty, but out of care. I signed those papers and then, honestly, I more or less forgot about them. It had been years. Dorothy and I had Sunday phone calls and occasional lunches, but she was never at the center of things. Melissa barely knew she existed as anything more than Aunt Dorothy, who sent nice birthday cards. That, as it turns out, was the thing Melissa forgot. When I landed back in Nashville, on Thursday afternoon I called Patrick from the airport. I'd told him about the phone call the night it happened, standing in my hotel room in the dark. He'd listened and then said something that scared me. He said, "Mom, don't go home alone." He had flown in. That's who was standing at baggage claim. My son, who lives in Oregon and takes a certain pride in being self-sufficient, standing there in his coat with red-rimmed eyes. And I knew before I even reached him that whatever was happening was real. My house looked the same from the outside. That was the strange part. I'd been bracing myself for something dramatic, and it just looked like my house, the oak tree in the front yard Gerald planted when Melissa was born, the porch he built, the windows I'd hung curtains in 23 years ago. But there was a lockbox on the front door, one of those real estate lockboxes, and tucked into the mailbox was a listing brochure with a photo of my kitchen on the cover and the words, "Offered at $610,000. Patrick put his hand on my shoulder. I couldn't speak. We had to call a locksmith to get in because Melissa had changed the key code on the garage door. That took 40 minutes. I sat on the porch steps during those 40 minutes and looked at Gerald's oak tree, and I thought about the fact that he planted it the same week Melissa was born, that he said every little girl deserved a tree to climb. Inside, some things were missing. Not dramatically, not emptied out, but my good china was gone. Some of Gerald's tools from the garage were gone. Several boxes of old photos I kept in the hall closet were gone. The house felt disturbed, like someone had moved through it while I wasn't home, which of course was exactly what had happened. I called Melissa. She answered. She said she was glad I was home safely. She said the nursing home, which she called the community, and then Sunrise Ridge, was expecting me to come tour it on Friday. She said she'd gotten a good interest rate from the listing agent, and that the market was strong. I said very quietly, "You went into my home without my permission." She said, "Mum, you gave me a key years ago." She said it like that settled it. I said, "I'm not going to Sunrise Ridge." And she said, "Mum, we've talked about this. You know you can't manage the house alone." "We have not talked about this. You announced it to me while I was watching the sunset in Hawaii." There was a pause. Then she said, "I've been worried about you for a long time. Dr. Fenwick agrees that—" "Who is Dr. Fenwick?" Silence. "Melissa, who is Dr. Fenwick?" "He's a geriatric specialist. I set up a consultation just to get a professional opinion." "You had a consultation with a doctor about me, without me?" Another pause. And in that pause, I heard something I hadn't expected to hear. Not defiance, not cruelty. Something closer to exhaustion. She said, "Mom, I can't do this anymore. Okay? I cannot keep worrying about you being out there, alone, on that property, and something happening and me being the one responsible. I can't—" Her voice cracked a little. "Craig and I are not in a good place right now, financially. And I know that sounds terrible, I know it does, but that house, sitting out there, with everything that's in it, and you—" She stopped herself. She had almost said it. I said, "Finish the sentence." She didn't. I hung up. Patrick stayed with me that night. We sat in my kitchen and I made us each a cup of tea, and I told him what she'd almost said. He listened. He wasn't entirely surprised. He said he'd had a feeling for a while that something was wrong on Melissa's end, that she'd asked him once, carefully, what he thought the property might be worth. We called Dorothy that night. I explained everything. She listened in that still way she has, not interrupting, not exclaiming. When I finished, she said, "Evelyn, did Melissa try to list the property?" I said, "She did list it. There's a brochure in my mailbox." Dorothy said, "Then someone made a very significant mistake." She explained it to me again, more clearly than Gerald had those years ago. The trust was irrevocable. That meant nobody could alter it, dissolve it, or override it without going through Dorothy. The house couldn't be listed, let alone sold, without the trustee's written authorization. Any real estate agent who accepted that listing without confirming the title structure had created a serious problem for themselves. She said, "Do you want me to make some calls in the morning?" I said, "Please. I want to tell you about the week that followed honestly, because it wasn't triumphant. It was hard in ways I didn't expect. The listing came down within 4 days. Dorothy's attorney sent a letter to the real estate agency explaining the trust structure, and they pulled it fast. They were mortified, or at least they acted mortified, which serves the same purpose. Melissa called me 3 times before I answered. When I finally picked up, on the 4th day, she sounded like she hadn't slept. She apologized. She said it in pieces, haltingly, not the smooth Melissa I was used to. She said she'd been desperate. She said she'd convinced herself she was helping me. She said she knew, even as she was doing it, that she was crossing lines she had no right to cross. I believe that she believed she was helping. I think that might actually be the saddest part. I did not yell at her. I'm telling you that because some people might expect the anger. And the anger was there, believe me. But I thought about what Gerald used to say, that you can be right and still wrong about how you handle being right. I didn't want to win a fight. I wanted my life back. I told her that I needed time. I told her that what she had done was a violation, that it came from a place of desperation I understood, but could not excuse. I told her that trust, once broken that way, is rebuilt slowly, if at all. I also told her, because I thought she needed to hear it, that I was sorry, not for protecting myself, not for calling Dorothy, but for spending 30 years teaching her, by example, that people who love you don't have limits. I taught her that you empty yourself for family and smile while you're doing it. That lesson had backfired on both of us. She cried. I didn't, which surprised me. I think I'd already done my crying in Hawaii. The listing agent received a formal complaint. Craig and Melissa did eventually get into financial counseling. I didn't ask for that. It wasn't my condition. I heard about it from Patrick, who heard it from Melissa herself. The debts were real. The pressure was real. None of that made what she did acceptable, but it made it human. I had Dorothy over for dinner that first Saturday. After everything had settled a little, she sat in the same chair Gerald used to sit in, the one at the end of the table, and I made his pot roast recipe, the one I've made 100 times, and we ate and talked the way we used to when Gerald was alive. She said at one point, "You know he set it up this way because he knew you." I said, "I know." She said, "He said you'd give away the whole farm if someone you loved needed it." I laughed, the first real laugh in about 2 weeks. He wasn't wrong. "No," she said, "he wasn't." I thought about Gerald that night, after Dorothy had gone home and I was cleaning up. I thought about how he sat at that kitchen table with his yellow legal pad and thought everything through. He wasn't dramatic about it. He didn't tell me he was protecting me from our own daughter, because he didn't know that was what he was doing. He was just being thorough, being the man he was. Some people leave you money or jewelry or furniture. Gerald left me something harder to see and more valuable than any of those things. He left me a structure that meant nobody could erase me without going through someone who loved me first. I still live in this house. I'm sitting in it right now, more or less, and the oak tree in the front yard has gone gold this week. Because it's October, I have a cup of tea. My feet are cold. The house needs some work. The porch railing is soft in one spot, and the upstairs bathroom faucet drips. And I like knowing those are my problems to handle. Melissa and I are finding our way back to something. It's slow and it's careful, and there are conversations we still haven't had, things that need to be said that neither of us has found the right words for yet. I don't know if we'll get all the way back, but I think we might. She's my daughter, the girl I carried and raised and loved. I'm not willing to give up on that, lightly, even after everything. What I am willing to say to anyone listening who needs to hear it is this: you are allowed to protect what you've built. You are allowed to plan for your own future without apologizing for it. The people who love you may mean well and still do harm. Being old does not make you a burden. Being alone does not make you helpless. And if someone tells you to move out of your own life for your own good, you have every right to look them in the eye and say, "No, I don't think so. Gerald knew I needed protecting from my own generosity." Dorothy was the quiet answer to that. We all need a Dorothy, and if you don't have one yet, it's not too late to find one. If any part of this story touched something in you, if you've sat in a house that felt suddenly unfamiliar, if you've loved someone who tried to take too much, I'd really love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. And if the kind of stories we tell on this channel, stories about real lives, real love, real loss, and the stubborn dignity that carries people through, if those stories belong in your life, please subscribe to Timeless Grandma Tales. There are more stories waiting, and every single one of them was lived before it was told. Thank you for being here with me today. It means more than you know.